As we get started this morning, I would like to, as oftentimes I do, I'd like to ask a question for you to get your minds thinking. And that question comes down to this. Many times in life, we decide to sign up for something, agree to something, choose to do something that we know is going to be really hard. Why do we do that? Why do we do that to ourselves? And this doesn't even have to be big things, right? Even things as simple as signing a family up or signing kids up for a sports league. Got to travel around, got to get to places, got to be in 4 different places at once. Why do we do that to ourselves? Maybe as our kids grow up and they start making those decisions for themselves and they sign themselves up to a sport or an extracurricular or some sort of competition, and they know there's going to be sacrifice. They may not know all of it, but they know that they're going to have to put time and effort and energy and thought process and weight into it, and they know it's going to be hard. Why do they do that to themselves? As we continue to grow up, maybe our kids are starting to think about what to do after graduation, and they start to think of college or trade school or whatever that may be, and those aren't easy to do either. I remember myself saying, I want to go to college, and I didn't know how hard it would be, but I decided to do it after hearing constantly growing up that college would be the hardest thing I'd ever done in life up till that point. Why did I do that to myself? Maybe in choosing a spouse or in starting a family, you're told of some of the struggles that can come from dynamics and raising kids and taking and serving a spouse and all that sort of stuff, but we still jump into it. Why do we do that to ourselves? Why do we do that? And you can just keep going on and on. Choosing a job you know is going to be challenging. Stepping into a situation to help somebody that you know is going to be hard. These are all choices that we make that make our lives a little bit more difficult or sometimes a lot more. The question is, why do we do that to ourselves? And the answer, I'm not going to make you think and wait all the way till the end to give you the answer. I'm just going to give you the answer so far this morning. Because even though we know it's going to be hard work, even though we know it's going to require sacrifice, even though we know that there will be difficulty somehow, some way, it is all gonna be worth it in the end, right? There's something at the end of that road that we say it is worth going through this difficulty because that will happen. Or at least I hope it will. I think it will. I want to ask that question this morning because when we start thinking about that in our lives and we transfer that over into the Christian life of choosing to do things that God encourages us to do, choosing to move in a direction that God is asking us to do, or even harder, choosing not to move when we want to and God says, wait. We do those things because we believe it's going to be worth it in the end. And that, in and of itself, is an example of faith. The last couple of months, we have been working through the faith of our forefathers and foremothers. Rahab, remember Rahab? And we've been looking at the different expressions of faith and the lives of these people of God that lived long before us. And we see time and time again ups and downs and difficulties and triumphs. And throughout all of it, in the messy and the clean and the good and the bad, we see these beautiful examples of faith, of trust in God, whether it's against the odds or in all uncertainty or in an unexpected turn of events, there is faith, there is trust that no matter what, God is worth trusting it. And today, we are going to look at that faith shown through actually the final group recognized in the hall of faith. We've gone through all these different people. We're up to the final one. Now, for those of you that are tearing up that we're finishing up this series today, don't worry, not today. That'll happen next Sunday. So you have a little bit of time to prepare emotionally for the ending of the series. But today is that final group. And I say group, you might notice I'm saying group, not person. Because the group that we're going to be talking about today and talking about their faith is the faith of the prophets. And we're going to see how they chose to step into a situation that they knew was going to be hard, that they knew at the end of the day was going to be worth it. And that I think that this passage is going to help you and I understand this key sentence, this key truth that can help us as we traverse through life. This is what all of our points are going to come back to. Normally you have to wait till the end. I'm giving it to you here in the beginning, and it is this. Faith helps us know that the ups and downs of life are worth it in God's plan. Faith helps us know the ups and downs of life are worth it in God's plan. That's what we're going to keep coming back to today, and we're going to see that in the life of the prophets. And we're going to see that as we primarily are going to spend our morning in the book of Hebrews. So for the second to last time in this series, would you please open your Bibles to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. The book of Hebrews, chapter 11. And we're going to be in verses 32 through 39. And as I'm sitting up here, Pastor John, I haven't done this to you in a while. Can I get some water, please? My own, please, if that's okay. It takes a long time to have to walk up here, and I mean germs, and it's getting cold out, and it's going around. But book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verses 32 through 39. As we've been going these last couple of weeks, we've been learning about just individuals in this long list in verse 32. And we've covered a few of them. We've covered, Samson, we've covered Jephthah, and today we are going to cover the prophets. And so I'm going to read this passage to you today, and then we're going to break it down and see again, how faith is shown in the life of the prophets. So if you would please, we're going to read Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32 through 39. It says this, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets." Thank you, John. "Who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised." And we'll save verse 40 in the beginning of chapter 12 for next Sunday. I'm not going to take too much of your message there, John. So this is our passage for today. And a very important question to ask when we're talking about the prophets is a very simple one. What is a prophet? What is a prophet? There are lots of prophets in the Bible, and the prophets are a fascinating bunch as you look at them. And I think there's a lot of the life of the prophets and the words of the prophets that as the average Christian goes to the Bible and looks at, there's a bit of the prophets that intimidates us, isn't there? There's a bit of us that's a little, as we look at it, we go, man, that's like a quarter of the Bible roughly. Man, the prophetic books are the longest books in the Bible. Have you ever sat down saying, all right, I'm going to read a part of the Bible, and you look and you're like, all right, let's see. Isaiah, 66 chapters. Ooh. Okay, let's see. Jeremiah, oh my gosh, what was it, like 52 or something like that? Ugh. Ezekiel, okay, that's got weird symbols in it. It's got wheels and griffin-type creatures and all sorts of funky stuff. And then you go to Daniel and you're like, I'm done. I can't. It's too weird. I don't understand this. I'm afraid of getting it wrong. I can't. I'm going to go to John, or I'm going to go to Matthew. That's something I can wrap my head around better. The prophets can be an intimidating bunch because the prophets, quite frankly, had a lot of stuff in their lives that we don't understand, that we struggle to comprehend in our limited human understanding. And I want to tell you, the hope that we feel in that is, I don't think we're the only ones. I think the prophets themselves didn't fully know what they were going through or understanding. Because what was happening with the prophets was God literally interacting and speaking to people. There's a lot of us in this room that while we're intimidated by the prophets, there's a part of us that's also like, but I would love to be a prophet strictly so that I knew God was talking to me. There's a part of us that's intimidated by them. There's a part of us that's a little jealous of them. Have you ever had a thought come up in your mind and not know if it was God? According to the Bible, God is very clear when he speaks to the prophets. He says, thus saith the Lord, so many times. There's a part of us that's jealous of them. There's also a part of us that's intimidated by them. The prophets, if we were to get a definition of what a prophet is, in particular with the Bible, it is this. A prophet was someone that God directly spoke to so that they could share God's words with those around them. That's the definition we're working with this morning. A prophet was someone that God directly spoke to. Thus saith the Lord. So that they could keep it to themselves and feel better? No. So that they could share God's words with those around them. The prophets were called to a very specific, very powerful, very supernatural ministry. And that makes us go, whoa, these guys are crazy. These guys have all this cool stuff and weird imagery and all sorts of stuff. But at the same time, they're just regular dudes. They're people. They have fears. They have anxieties. They have stress. They have shame. They're just people that God chose to directly talk to so that they could share that with somebody else around them. That is what a prophet is. By that definition, we think of very famous prophets in the Bible. We think of Isaiah. We think of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, these books of the prophets. We think of Samuel as well. We may even think of Moses. Moses was a prophet. We don't always think of him as a prophet. He's kind of a unique one. He's kind of a little bit of a bunch of stuff. But he was spoken to directly by God. These are examples of prophets in the Bible. And so if that is our definition, if that's what we're working with, how did these prophets show their faith? How did these prophets show the faith that they had in God? I'm going to give you 4 different ways. 4 different ways this morning. Way number 1. They showed that they had faith. They showed their faith in God in their calling / their office. A prophet is a role. It's an office. It's a specific title with a specific set of responsibilities. And there's a part of us, again, that feels jealous because we want to hear God's direct words. And so we're kind of like, man, I wish that could be me. I wish God could directly speak to me. That would be great. It'd really remove all of the confusion that I feel at times. And I want to compare that with the office and calling of what a prophet was supposed to do and how people in the Bible responded to God telling them, you're going to be a prophet. Because of all the times that God directly comes to a person and says, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go be a prophet. Can you think of a single time that somebody heard that from God and went, awesome. This is going to be great. I'm so excited for this. Can you think of that time? Because I cannot. And I looked and I could not find one. Anytime God directly speaks to someone and tells them this is what's going to happen, he either tells them a job description that we would turn and run from, or you hear that human pleading with God and giving reason after reason about why they cannot do what God is calling them to do. The role/office of the prophet was an incredibly difficult one. And this is seen most clearly in Isaiah chapter 6. You may think of Isaiah chapter 6 and the year that King Uzziah died. I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim, and there's these angels, and there's this power, and there's this stuff, and there's this whole glory to the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Holy, not glory. Holy. The whole earth is filled with his glory, and we see all this stuff that's happening, and we get to verse 8, and it says, and I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then you hear Isaiah's voice say, here I am, send me. He's like, all right, what do we got? And God says, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Isaiah goes, whoa, that's what you want me to say to them? Then Isaiah says, how long, O Lord? How long do I have to do this? And God responded, until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste. That's a hard message to give. I want God to tell me what he wants me to do, but I don't want him to tell me to do that. Come on, God, change what you're going to tell me to do. Tell me it's going to be better. Tell me it's going to be good. Tell me it's going to be great. Here God says, no, this is what you must communicate with the people. Think of the fear as Isaiah is staring at God, or at least what he can comprehend being in the throne room of heaven and being told, here's what I want you to do. Go and tell them they're not going to understand me. Go and tell them, don't listen to me. And how long are you going to do that? Until their land is destroyed, until the people are gone. Do you want that calling? Do you want that responsibility? How could a human agree to something like that? The answer is having faith. Is through believing that, again, that main idea, faith helps us know the ups and downs of life are worth it in God's plan. God has a plan here to use these prophets for a specific purpose. And no human would hear that and say, I'm in, unless they knew at the end of the day there would be something good that came from it. Who would sign up for this? I would struggle to, and I believe you would as well, without knowing that God has a plan even for this. This is the first way we see faith in the prophets, in their calling and in their office. The second way that we see faith in the prophets, the first is through their calling or office, and the second was in their mighty works. And this is where we jump back to Hebrews chapter 11. And we look at this long list of stuff that these different people did. And these different list of stuff could go to different people within this list in verse 32. But imagine in particular, this list is especially pertinent to the prophets. And we're going to start off here with the mighty, the powerful, the stuff you make children's curriculum out of at churches because it's big, it's crazy, and it's cool, and it's awesome. And it's in verses 33 through 35. And it says this, that through faith they conquered kingdoms. They enforced justice. They obtained promises. They stopped the mouths of lions. They quenched the power of fire. They escaped the edge of the sword. They were made strong out of weakness. They became mighty in war. They put foreign armies to flight. The women received back their dead by resurrection. And that's where we're going to stop here for a moment. The prophets did some amazing things. The clear demonstrations of God's power and God's work and what he was doing was shown through the ministry of these prophets. Just a few different points to note in this section is that as we look at it, we see things that we may recognize. Stopping the mouths of lions. Who doesn't think of Daniel and being put into the Persian pit of lions and praying and God closing their mouths? I can just smell the animal crackers in the children's Sunday school hour. Can you not? That's crazy. That's cool. It's a mighty work of God. When the Persians came back and they said, "Are you still there?" He said, "I am. God has protected me." A mighty work of God. We may think of others, and one we may not think of that much is enforced justice. We hear that, and we may not think of that as much, but an incredible part of the ministry of the prophets was to enforce justice in a time where there was incredible injustice in the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Whenever we see the Bible, many different times talk about helping those who are downtrodden, the widows, the orphans, the immigrants, and the poor. Those are the four downtroddens of the scriptures. We hear it in the prophets criticizing the leadership for not taking care of the least of these. They enforced justice in incredible ways, and they spoke against the leadership of the kingdoms that was not honoring God and was not honoring the people. They conquered kingdoms. They obtained promises. They quenched the power of fire. You may think of Elijah and Mount Carmel, not caramel, Carmel, where Elijah is competing against these false prophets of Baal, or Baal as we may call them. And Elijah is insulting these pagan false gods. And Elijah is putting everything against the God of Israel, pouring water on his offering plates, and people are running around and crazy, and he calls upon God, and God sends a hurtling cloud of fire down and creates the offering. Mighty works of God. The prophets did some incredible stuff, and they showed their faith, even to the point of resurrecting the dead. Again, our minds may go to Elijah and Elisha with the healing of the widow's children. You put that in comparison to the leadership of the time, enforcing justice and raising the children of the widows from the dead. Mighty, mighty works. We don't see those kinds of miracles that much. God is using them. Their faith is shown clearly, and their trust of God for incredible things to happen. And that, I think, can come back to our big idea of faith helping us to know the ups and the downs in life are worth it in God's plan. They saw some incredible ups in their lives, and we do too. We see some incredible moments of God doing something, and the prophets were able to point all of those back to God. That's the second way they showed their faith. And while they had incredible ups again, they had incredible downs in their lives. The third way the prophets showed their faith. The first was in their calling or office, the second was in their mighty works, and the third was in their sufferings. And for this part, we have to go back to verse 35. And we cut off in the middle of verse 35 there in Hebrews chapter 11, because the first half is these incredible displays of power. The second half are these incredible displays of suffering. And it says this: some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. Some were stoned. Some were sawn in two. Some were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. We can think of these different examples of suffering through the lives of the different prophets. Again, my mind goes to Elijah, one who is spoken of well, who encountered such turmoil and struggle in his ministry that he wished for God to take his life away, and was left afflicted, destitute, alone, in a cave. It said that he wore these kinds of clothing, the skins of sheep and goats. With every powerful moment of the prophets, we also see an equal or greater amount of lowly moments for the prophets. The prophets did not live in luxury. The prophets were not celebrities. They were the ways that God spoke to people on the earth. And if we think of Jesus' words that if you go out in my name and I am hated, you also will be hated. Think even so of the prophets. That they went out carrying God's judgments and God's words, that some were great to hear, but many were difficult. They were not popular people. They were known, but they were not popular people. And this all comes back to those promises that God would give these prophets, and that you're going to go and you're going to communicate my words, and you're going to tell them of the judgment to come, and you're going to tell them of their need to repent and to turn back to the Lord, and they're not gonna listen. That's a bad evangelism strategy, is it not? But it's coming from the mouth of God. So it can't be bad, right? Doesn't sound successful, at least if your desire and it's complicated, it's hard. And this, I think, these prophets is what that these prophets noticed when they knew what they were signing up for, and as they were figuring out what they were a part of. Imagine a ministry of going to people for years and telling them to turn to the Lord. And they did it. Would you sign up for that? We see this of the ways the prophets were killed. Now, we have to be careful here, because there are several examples of prophets being killed in the Bible. But when we think of the Isaiahs and the Jeremiahs and the Ezekiels and the big names of prophets, we don't oftentimes see the end of their lives. To understand and to have an idea of what may have happened to them, we have to jump out of the Bible for half a second here. Not interpreted in the same way as the Bible, not interpreted as 100,000% truth like what the Bible is, but follow these ancient Jewish traditions of the final destination of these prophets. And when you look at these extra biblical sources, more often than not, these prophets did not die of natural causes. That verse, that part where it says that some were sawn in two, that is a reference to the tradition of the prophet Isaiah, where people believed, and I think that people of this time period believed, the Jews believed, that Isaiah was sawn in half by the wicked king Manasseh. He was stuffed into a hollow log, and he was sawn in half and died that way. Now again, this isn't the Bible, but this is our next best understanding. It said some were stoned. That tradition belongs to Jeremiah, where he was stoned when he was left in Egypt. Of all the different prophets who had died, the only one that I knew who had died and was buried with honor was, again, this is all tradition, the only one that I could find was the prophet Daniel, where he was buried with honor in Babylon or in Persia. Others did die of natural causes according to these traditions, but many of them died as martyrs. So much so that when we get to the story of Jesus in the New Testament, Jesus' critique on the people of Israel is that they are not listening to God just like the people of old did not listen to the prophets. Have you ever noticed Jesus saying that in the New Testament? As he says, you guys are doing exactly what your forefathers did. You think you're better than them, but you're not. You're not listening to God's words just like they didn't. They killed the prophets. And what did the Jews of Jesus' day do? They killed John the Baptist. They killed Jesus. Thankfully, he rose from the dead. The Jews killed the apostles. The Romans did, and other peoples did as well. But we see the similar line of thinking in that when God sends his people to earth, they are not received. When God sends his message to earth, it is not received well. This is an interesting study. This is an interesting group of people to go through when in Act 9 we're talking about the book of Acts where we're hearing miracles and hundreds of thousands coming to faith. And we're like, man, I want to be in Acts. I don't want to be in Isaiah. Why would you sign up for this? And maybe to make this more personal, why do we maybe not sign up for this, but sign up for choosing to follow God, knowing that if you go in my name, you would be hated just like I was? Why do we do that? The answer comes back to faith. Faith helps us know the ups and downs of life are worth it in God's plan. Faith helps us know the ups and downs of life are worth it in God's plan. Only a fool would it go into suffering knowing it would be pointless, knowing it would lead to nothing good. The prophets, in their times of doubt, in their times of triumph, in their times of suffering, in their times of good, knew that something good was coming. Knew that it was worth it to be in line with God's plan. And this brings us to the final way that the faith of the prophets was shown. The first way, in their calling or their office. And the second way, in their mighty works. And the third way, in their suffering. And the fourth way, in their hope. And this brings us to verse 39, where it says, "And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised." Now, Pastor John's going to share with us a little bit more about how to look at verse 39 in perspective of the entirety of chapter 11. So I'm dipping my toes into John's message and just going to talk about the prophets here. So I got the prophets taken care of. Don't worry. I'm letting you off the hook here on this one, but the rest of it's on you. What was promised to the prophets? What was promised to them? It says that something was promised, and it says they did not receive. What was promised to them? What were they hoping in? What did they know was gonna eventually appear or come or be there? The Messiah. Because the prophets, and all their doom and gloom and judgment and destruction and all that sort of stuff, at the end of each of those prophecies of judgment and of the day of the Lord and of the wicked perishing, at the end of that was always a promise of hope or of restoration. And my people would return. Or my people would come back, or I would make a new covenant, or better yet, and this brings us well into our current part of the year, where the virgin would conceive and bear a son. And they should call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Or maybe even Isaiah chapter 11, that the root from David, a righteous branch shall come from the root of Jesse, from the tribe of Judah. And he would rule with justice and righteousness. And the days of his throne will know no end. This sounds a lot like Christmas, doesn't it? The prophets knew in all of what they were saying, in all of the difficulty, there was something coming at the end of it all. And that made it worth it to them. That was what they held to. That was what they knew to be their strength. Is that, yes, there would be difficulty, there would be judgment, but there would be hope. God would break through, and he would make everything right. And this is the hope that we carry with us today, do we not? The funny thing about the prophets, and verse 39 says it, is that they were commended through their faith, but they did not receive what was promised. They told of a greater hope to come, but they did not see that greater hope to come. They were told that this Emmanuel would appear, but none of them ever saw this Emmanuel. Only John the Baptist did, and he still got beheaded. And there's a part of that we hear and we absolutely relate to as God's children. Because if you are a believer and you have your hope set on Jesus right now, I trust that your hope isn't just set on of what Jesus did in the past, but what Jesus will do in the future, right? It's great what Jesus did in the past, dying on the cross, raising from the dead, removing that barrier between God and man, allowing us to recognize our need for God, for Jesus as our Savior from our sins when we are so hopelessly lost. And all of that's great. And all of that was done to prepare us for that future coming of Jesus. And we're waiting for that today. That promise has been made to you and I, though we may not all see it or receive it. Jesus will come back, but we may not be on earth when it happens. I think there's a big part of us that hopes to be on earth when that happens, to be that generation, but that's not promised to you and I. And so just as the prophets did not receive what was promised to them, they had faith that it would come. And you and I, though we may not receive what has been promised to us, we still have that hope that it will happen. I'm not calling all of us prophets. But I am saying that tension that they had, we must relate to well. Not that we can, but that we must. Because their faith was built on that anticipation. Our faith must be built on the same. Not just of what Jesus has done, but what Jesus will do. What is your faith built on? What are you trusting in when the rest of life is falling apart before your very eyes? What is that foundation that you cling so desperately to when things seem wrong? Hope in God. And this is where I'll do my shameless plug that Pastor John mentioned, our study that we're going to be doing in December. I don't have the little Devo up here in front of me. Do you have it with you, John? Where is it? Here it is. And that's why I'm excited that God we don't work out these series and the way that they work and what we teach on whenever they happen. If you think we do, we're not that smart. I'm really excited that we had just started working through and we finalized the details of what we're going to go through in December, because this hope that we are looking at this morning is the hope of the Christmas season, of the Advent season. The season of Advent is a season of waiting on that hope to be fulfilled, joining with the people of God from across all of history and time, that we're always waiting, hoping in God for what He would do, and we get to join that. We get to be united with God's people as we anticipate our Messiah. And I hope that you join us in that study. We all need a little bit of practice in waiting, don't we? And that's what Advent can do for you and me. I hope you would join us in that. And in these 4 ways, God showed through the prophets what their faith looked like in their calling, in their mighty works, in their suffering, and in their hope. And it all comes back to faith helping us know the ups and downs of life are going to be worth it in God's plan. And that brings us back to that opening question. Why do we go through things that are difficult? Why do we sign up for difficulty and trial and suffering? Because we believe it's going to be worth it in the end. Why do we follow in obedience to God? Why do we strive every day to know Him more, to grow closer to Him, to wish to show His goodness to the world around us? Knowing full well the trials it will bring, knowing the guarantee of suffering that goes along with a surrender to the gospel of God, because we know it's going to be worth it in the end. To believe in God is to be in God's plan. To surrender yourself to the gospel is to be in God's plan, and that's the best place that we can be. That's the place that the prophets were. They showed it in many ways, and they stumbled and fell, and God picked them up, and they stumbled and fell, and God picked them up, and they wept and they suffered, and they promised through God something greater that would come. And we ourselves can and must do the same. It's worth it when we follow after God. We can't make it right. He will.